Let's get corrupted. What up, YouTube? It's your boy Joe with Meteoric Serpents coming back at you for another episode of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. Guys, we have a great episode in store for you today. We're bringing on Dr. Zac Loughman. Great guest to have, one of the co-hosts of the Colubrid Colubroid Radio. He's also a professor. He wrote a book, which we're going to be talking about today. Guys, if you're a reptile nerd and you want more books in your collection, definitely hit up Zac for his book because it's fantastic. Was flipping through it today to remind myself and see what's all in there and just some amazing things. So go pick that up. Very cool to have that in my reptile library. Typical stuff as usual, guys. Of course, we have Meteoric Serpents t-shirts available. If you are interested in one of those, make sure you hit me up and I can get one of those out to you. All my social medias are down below as usual. Instagram is the best place to reach me. Make sure you like and subscribe on today's podcast. Definitely hit that subscribe. We're making our way to 1,000 subscribers. And thank you all so much for, tuning in, hanging out, and supporting me. It's been really awesome. There are animals available on Morph Market. Still have some couple going out this week, so that's cool. As usual, I always promote this. If you're looking to diversify your diet, especially for your colubrids, you should definitely try Blake's Exotic Feeders on Instagram. He's got quail. Been loving feeding quail to all my rat snake species. Really good to diversify the diet from rodents, and in my opinion, better feeding response. Like, they just nail the quail. It's awesome. And if you're going to do that, don't go to his website. Send him a DM on Instagram because you'll get a hookup when it comes to shipping. If you go to the website, it'll default to shipping price. So definitely hit him up on the DMs and say that Joe from Meteoric sent you, and you'll be good to go. Other than that, I have said it on the past few episodes. I did launch the Meteoric Serpents Patreon. Some cool benefits there. Also community building, guys. I just want to, grow together as a community, see who's out there, wants to learn more. Definitely some more behind the scenes access with me. I think that'll be really cool. Plus, you're supporting me making this podcast better. And that's all I want to do is bring you guys awesome, amazing content. And, all of your guys' support means the world and keeps me going. Before we get started, let's see who is in the chat today. Bosa, thank you for being here. Eric's More Factory, my guy, what's up? Alex, thanks for tuning in. Adam, thanks for being here. Cody from Morph Kings, thanks for being here. Kevin, what's up, man? Thanks for tuning in. Ryan Manfredi, what's up, dude? Don D, thanks for tuning in. Nikki Manfredi, thanks for being here. And Elias from Creative Reptiles, thanks for hanging out. All right, guys, without further ado, I do want to bring out our guest. Let's introduce him, Dr. Zac Loughman. What's up, Zac? How are you?
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, so, I was kind of saying beforehand, you have a pretty, you've built this great reputation in the hobby, and arguably having one of the biggest or the biggest Colubrid podcast is just really awesome. When like minds are able to connect on a show like this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Both Clint and I have listened to yours or watched yours, I should say, and we like what we see. So more.
Thank you, man.
I think I was telling Clint when we found out that you had this, that as long as it's quality, we'll support it, and it's quality, so we support it. So there you go.
Thank you, man. That means a lot coming from you guys. So much appreciated. All right. So as we get started, I always ask everyone, however long or short you want to go, can you please kind of explain your background into reptiles and getting into snakes and all that?
Sure. I've said this on several podcasts already. I'm that oddball that knew exactly what they wanted to do since they were tiny. There has not been a moment of my life where I was not upset with animals. And it was kind of your classic backstory. I grew up in the 80s and then was in high school in the 90s and then went to college in late 90s, early 2000s. So that's kind of my time frame. And my first pet besides a dog cat was a box turtle, that my eastern box turtle. My grandfather had a business and he just drove all over the place. And classic story where it rains, the box turtles come out on the road, and then that's when he caught Boxy, original name, and brought me that turtle, and I was completely gobsmacked by that animal. I spent hours of my life chasing down worms, and then to feed the turtle and everything. And my dinosaur phase, that was when I was in like second grade, I think, first grade, second grade. But my dinosaur phase kind of came to an end in third grade, like it does with many people, which is, they're extinct. And I know birds are technically, the avian dinosaur clade gone haywire. But besides those typical looking reptiles, the only ones that were alive were, of course, are snakes, lizards, turtles, things like that. And so in third grade, that's when I kind of did this like veer stage left. Still love dinosaurs. I'm teaching vertebrate zoology this semester. And I spend like 4 weeks on dinosaurs, and it's like beyond nerdy, the stuff that I get into. So I still do that, but there was something pretty awesome about being able to go in my backyard and flip over a log and find a salamander, or there were a couple holes along the foundation of our house that garter snakes were hibernating in. And so in like late March, early April, I would literally stalk those things like a freaking velociraptor hunting its prey. And anyway, so that was part of it. And then my parents were teachers. I was always raised in an education-centric environment. I was not a really good student. I actually have a learning disability, which a lot of people don't know.
Oh, wow.
Which is I can't do math at all. 2 + 2 is 6. About 30% of the time I add them together. So it was not in the cards for me to be a college professor and have a PhD and do all that. But I just basically went after things. So
that's awesome.
And gave it all my go, and went into high school, did science fairs. And then the science fairs were always animal centric. Went to college. And then when I went to college, I had a guy here named Bob Gordon. He was my advisor, and he was a herpetologist, and he was completely insane in a good way. He gave me the zoology lab, and he literally said the first day I showed up, fill it. And so I did. And so that's when I, all through college is when I went a little bit ballistic. I had monitors, a lot of monitor lizards, pythons, some colubrids back then. But then I married my wife, went to graduate school. And in grad school, when you're bouncing around doing field work all the time, you don't have time for herps. So that's when I kind of segued out of herpetoculture. And then we got our major here in we started planning it in 2014. So that was 10 years ago. And that's when I realized you could have an animal collection. And I tiptoed up to the line and then dove head first in, and the rest is history. Now I am where I am. So that's that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's just that's a great story. Not I don't think I realized that about not being able to do the math, and science became your kind of strong suit, which is pretty cool. And then kind of defying those odds, and going to get that PhD, and being a professor. So that's awesome.
It's funny, a lot of people, myself included, in undergrad, I did not, I thought that I was screwed. I took general chemistry 3 times because I couldn't do the stupid
There's a lot of math there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I was the weirdo that took this thing called organic chemistry, which normally just thrashes people. And I had no problem with organic because there wasn't any freaking math.
Okay. So organic chem is what took me out of my bio major and put me into finance. So we're actually opposites.
Yeah. No, couldn't do the numbers, but organic, right through it. But I got to graduate school, and then that's when I realized that when you're actually doing science, which is that's the difference between undergrad and graduate school, that there's this wonderful term called collaboration, which is basically like, okay, I can't do statistics, which I actually can do statistics. It's the only math I can do, but let's just say I can't do it. I go find somebody that can do statistics. I work with them. And then when we go to publish a paper, they get put on the paper as the stats guy or gal. And then I get put on the paper as the biologist. And that's been the story of my career. So like, since I started this whole thing here, I've kind of allied myself with some really freaking smart people who tell me, Zach, go get this data. And then I go get the data. I hand it off to them. They do the analysis. And then what I'm able to do is write. So then I can do the writing, because a lot of scientists don't like to write. So,
gotcha.
And that's basically, how that whole thing goes down.
Yeah. Cool. So kind of getting into your collection, because part of your collection is kind of the schools. I know you have your home collection, and then part of your collection is the school's collection, which is, also cool, because I mean, I don't know what your kind of limit is, but I know you get obvious like funding to keep these animals because they are used in these experiments. How has that been, kind of being able to pick and choose almost whatever you want, because it's for, class and scientific research?
Yeah. We'll talk about the university collection first, and then we'll talk about mine second, because they are separate entities. But initially I was not supposed to be the person in charge of zoo science. We hired a professor who had a AZA background. He studied, if you know what these are, hellbenders for his PhD, which is by weight North America's largest salamander. And I was supposed to be the ecologist studying these things over here, the crayfish behind me. There you go.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those.
And Joe, Dr. Greathouse, was really good at what he did, and he got offered a directorship of a zoo right down the road. It happened to be our partner zoo. And so one day I walked down the hall, and it's like, hey, Zach, you're in charge of zoo sci now. I was like, wait, what? So I told my then boss, like, if I'm in charge, we're going to have an animal collection. It's going to be a good one. But it has to be reptile and amphibian centric, because that's what I have a background in. I can't be taking care of mammals and birds. Right. And basically, it literally boiled down to whatever my vision was, we could do within reason. And I mentioned that I kept monitors when I was in college. I will fully admit that there was one purchase right off the bat, like immediately, that was just fulfilling a childhood dream, which is I bought that water monitor. I think within an hour of finding out that I could do this, I was on Fauna trying to find a captive-born macromaculatus water monitor. And it took me about 2 weeks. But I got him. And that's, of course, Norbert. He's the flagship animal of our collection. But in building the collection, there were some growing pains. So I did not want us to have a Petco collection. That's what I didn't want to have ball pythons and crested geckos and bearded dragons. There were a couple universities that had reptile collections, and that's what it was. At the same time, I knew, we're not going to have like crazy obscure things either, because it's to teach people. And, a lot of our people coming in don't know anything about anything. So when structuring and building the collection, I kind of had the strategy of, we're going to have like a bulk of animals that are damn near indestructible. And so that would be where our corn snakes and king snakes, pine snakes, bull snakes, gopher snakes. We have ball pythons, things, and we have a bearded dragon. We have got blue tongues. We've got, all that stuff. But at the same time, I also knew, like, if you're paying to go to school, I feel like there should be some like perks. You should get to work with some animals that are kind of obscure, not like we're not going to have earless monitors here ever. But at the same time, there are some snakes out there and lizards and things like that. So that fit that bill. So like for pythons, I got olive pythons. So we have those. We have womas. let me trying to go through everything in my head. We got yellowtail crebos, blacktail crebos, eastern indigos. So we have a bunch of Drymarkin. Of course, we've got the false water cobras, Barron's racers, tricolor hognose snakes. So, so in building the collection, there were like obscure animals, non-obscure animals, and then I'm a scientist, and when you do science, you have to have replication. So we have what we call our research colonies. And our research colonies are where we have the same species. We just have a bunch of them. So we can do replicate trials when we're doing theses and student projects, undergrad capstones. So for those species, we have 30 corn snakes. It's a mixture of Abbott line, Okeetees, and then just generic normal corn snakes I made with my male corn snake and the first female corn snake we purchased. We obviously hognose snakes. That's the next big push for me with research. So we have 35 westerns or plains hognose snakes from multiple lines. We have a bunch of Pitchophis. So we don't have like 30 pine snakes, but we have about 20 pits across multiple subspecies and species. And so those animals, we have those because you need that replicate. And so it's funny because it amounts to about 400 animals. So we're taking care of a lot of animals here. It takes 6 graduate students all day to take care of them. I've got a dedicated animal keeper, we call her Miss Lauren Mort. And then one of our faculty members who also was my former graduate student, Miss Kinsey Guthrie. So there's like literally a team of 9 people, and then add that 100 undergrads. So we have a really weird problem here, which is there's too many people taking care of the animals. So we have to figure out like how to communicate, how to do biotic control. So like we want to make sure if we've got a kid that has a bunch of, they went to the Pittsburgh Reptile Show and bought some imported whatever that's loaded with mites and viruses and everything else. Like, we had to build a culture where like you do not go in on Monday and do animal care that day. So, so that would be like the growing pains and piece and things like that. But, and then I'm in my office right now, and my office is kind of this weird purgatory land because the snakes that are in here, we use them for school, but a lot of them are my personal animals. So like I've got a bunch of tricolor hogs in here. Right over there are the infamous false water cobras that are all over that book you held up. So, and I got a bunch of king snakes in here, which, shocker, because that's the other thing I've got a lot of. So, so that's the school collection. At home, it's very it's different and it's not. So I have actually more false water cobras at my house than I do here. So I have a colony of 8.8, which is a lot of 8-foot snakes that crap every other day. My wife is a wonderful human for putting up with the random smells about 2 days after I feed them. But anyway, so I've got the falsies at home. And then at home, most of what I have is either false water cobras, a lot of locality king snakes. As being a field biologist and a taxonomist when it comes to crayfish, the whole locality colubrid thing for me is like, it doesn't get any better than that. Plus I can go to the different locations. Like we just got back from spring break, and I was driving through Liberty County, Florida, and I have Liberty County means eye or going eye or whatever you want to call them. And it was really cool to kind of be there in those gorges and be where, Bruce Means found the animals and where Crisco described it. And I like that I can incorporate the herping and the keeping and the natural history nerddom. It's like one giant stew. So lots and lots of locality king snakes at my house. And then I have a handful of oddballs. So I have like Madagascar hognose snakes there. I have a couple Baron eye because I love Baron's racers. We have Baron eye here at the school too. I got my Musaranas. So pretty much everything that's in the book obviously is at my house. And then I have some some Gilas. So
Okay.
just as something, I always wanted Gila monsters, and someone offered them to me at a really good price, and I was like, I can't pass these up. But with the king snakes, I don't know exactly how many localities. I know I have 8 different localities of Florida kings. I really like Florida kings. I don't know why I like Florida kings. I've liked Florida
They're cool
kings.
animals.
I liked them when I was 18.
Animals.
I liked them when I was 19. I came back. I tried to do the Asian rat snake thing, be Matt Most Jr. Asian rat snakes kicked my ass. And I was like, why don't, this isn't fun. Like, I just want something like I could give it a mouse and it's biting my face off. So king snakes is where it was for me. So I have those. I have Outer Banks kings.
I'll tell you what, cockseye are some of my most aggressive eaters.
Yeah. Oh no.
They come out almost as crazy as my Texas rats, honestly, in terms of food motivation.
No, they're fantastic. So, I have every subspecies that I can legally keep in West Virginia. We have herp regs, and the way the herp regs work is if you can keep a native species as long as it doesn't share the phenotype of what the West Virginia animals look like. So for like Eastern king snakes, I just have the Chesapeake locality Eastern kings with the really wide white bands, because there have only been like 4 Eastern kings found in West Virginia ever, and they have really thin bands. So there's that. But black king snakes, they look the same everywhere. So that's the only subspecies I don't keep, because I being a conservation biologist, I don't want to break rules. There's no reason for me to do that.
Right.
So, but every other subspecies I have in my collection. So,
very cool.
and it amounts to, at home, I think I sit at about 100 animals.
Okay.
And then hognose snakes also. I have Southerns, Mexicans, and Plains, because I wanted to raise all of them up because I'm writing the book. So it's kind of eclectic, but at the same time organized, which sums me up perfectly. Yeah.
Cool. I wanted to, so obviously your collection is so vast and diverse. If you didn't mind, I did want to kind of do a deep dive into a few of the species you keep, especially especially one that has yet to be mentioned on this show, which are your false water cobras, and arguably your like bread and butter. Because I haven't had anyone on to kind of talk about them. So if you don't mind, kind of go through what it is, talk about, false water cobras, what they're like, and your collection with them.
So my initiation into false water cobras, I remember seeing them occasionally in the late 90s, early 2000s. I would go to this show that was, I've had several people tell me it's actually the longest monthly show in America. It's the All Ohio Reptile Show, which was based out of Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
And I would go to that when I was in college. It's only 2 hours from campus, because I went to school at West Liberty as well. So I went to that religiously. And, I guess I didn't talk about this either. I keep Nerodia too. So there's a bunch of Nerodia at my house as well. I like snakes that, like, my favorite place to herp are swamps. I've been to the desert. I've been in rainforest. I've been in the prairie. I've been in forests. I just love seeing a snake in water and diving in after. Like, that's it for me. And so aquatic snakes have always been my favorite. And I distinctly remember the first time I talked to somebody that had a false water cobra at their table, they said what a lot of people thought about false water cobras, which is, the guy, I distinctly remember him telling me it's a rear fang, but its venom is equal to a timber rattlesnake. And if you bite, if you get bit, you're going to have your hand amputated and it's going to be horrible. And they're really aggressive and they crap everywhere, and you just don't want it. So it was really weird, because at that time I was about to buy the damn thing and he talked me out of buying the snake. So, and then I went online and looked stuff up, and there was a lot of statements that reinforced that ideology. And so, fast forward, that's like 2000. Fast forward to 2016, and I'm sitting on my couch trying to buy the animals for the Zoo Science collection. And, I knew I had false water cobras kept popping up. And I kept saying, like, you can't get that. You can't get that. You're not going to get that. And invariably, I ended up doing some research, and we talk crap about social media a lot in groups, but I have to say that the false water cobra Facebook groups are actually pretty solid. And so there was one on fauna. I didn't know about Morph Market then. I don't know how many people were using Morph Market back then. But anyway, so I went, tried to find stuff.
It was brand new, I think.
Yeah.
Right at that time, it was brand new.
Okay. I found the Facebook group, and I'm reading about these people taking care of these animals. And I was like, okay. So this is saying exactly the opposite of this. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to get one for the school. I'm going to get one for me. So the only time I've been in a tattoo shop was when I bought my first false water cobra, which is fun. I drove up to Pittsburgh. Some guy said, come in the back. It was a classic reptile deal. So nice. I gave him, I think it was $200. And then I walked away with the snake that is literally, she's still up there. Her name is Lily, for Lilith, Queen of the Damned. Because that snake, she did it for me. First time I offered that baby falsie a mouse, and it like slowly came up and it, tongue flicked. And then it just freaking lost its goddamn mind. It grabbed the mouse, started like wrapping up the tongs. It actually yanked. Like, I've never had snakes yank on a prey item, and it yanked the forceps out of my hand.
Really?
And I love animals that are crazy. Like, I don't want calm. I think that's why I like king snakes. And so from that moment on, I was smitten. Like, I just knew these things are always going to be part of my life. So as far as taking care of them is concerned, you have to be prepared for that. That's why I tell that story. They're kind of weird in that they have a very distinct ontogenic behavioral change, which basically means they act one way when they're babies, they act another way when they're juveniles, and they act a completely different way when they're adults. And it's almost like you're taking care of three different snakes. But when they're little, that's when they have a tendency to be aggressive. That's when they hood. That's when they bite.
Got it.
That's when they can be a little bit off the chain. But what many people don't realize is that's the case for about 75% of them. But 1 out of every 4 is this really shy snake that won't do the classic behaviors, and they don't eat well, and you've got to be really calm and collective. And I like that because there is not one mold. There's a general mold, but you don't know if you're going to get that or not. So you get the kind of crazy attitude when they're little, and then when they get to be about 3 feet long, they calm down a lot. They still will hood. The biting has a tendency to go away, though it doesn't go away all the way at that point. And if you smell like a mouse, rat, frog, quail, you're going to get bit. So you've got to be like careful because they don't care. Yes. And the feeding bites are the ones that lead to envenomations that are bad. So if it's a defensive pop, they normally don't do anything. But if they get you and they chew, you got problems. And then by the time they get to be adults, this is where it gets kind of tricky, because I don't think anybody should be walking around with a false water cobra like it's a freaking corn snake. I don't do that. I've got more of these things than anybody I know. At the same time, they generally are not aggressive once they get above 5 feet. But, I still treat them with a lot of respect. I use hooks when I can. And I don't do anything stupid with them because they can deliver a gnarly bite. The problem with the bites is that 49 out of 50 bites, nothing happens. And so then you get lulled into this false sense of security. Right. But then that 50th bite happens, and then you got a problem. There was a recent bite that showed up on social media that I wish, that sounded horrible. I don't wish the bite would have happened to the poor person, but I really wish I could have had those photographs for the book. Because you can get hematomas with the bites. You can get a lot of swelling. You can get bruising. But as a general rule, their venom delivery system is not efficient enough to get that stuff into you. And the thing that people don't realize is the metalloproteases that are in there are similar to what's in a timber rattlesnake. It's just the delivery is so inefficient compared to a pit viper that that's where you're kind of rolling dice, if you know what I'm saying. So,
Okay.
but the other thing I would say about false water cobras is I will die on this hill. There are people that do it. Keeping them in racks, you can't. I'm not anti-rack. I am absolutely anti-rack for adult false water cobras. When they
Makes
crap,
sense.
it's like a toddler taking a dump. I mean, it's a massive pile of crap. And that's
Yeah.
going to off-gas ammonia and a lot of gnarly nasty. And you need to have very good ventilation. And I just don't think you can get it with that. And these things are so intelligent and engaging that I think you are literally, it's almost like you're mistreating them if you're not giving them some kind of mental engagement. We have a walk-in enclosure here at the school. It's about, I think it's 9 feet long, 4 feet deep, and about 8 feet tall. And it's got branches and everything. And I keep all the males. I cohab the males in there. And they're up in the tree branches 8 feet off the ground 4 out of every 7 days.
Okay.
So, but they're not arboreal snakes. They just, you give them something, they're going to use it. And that's why I love keeping them, is that they're not a living rock. Like, they're there.
Yeah.
And you have to be on your toes with them. So at home, I got cages from Cryptic enclosures out of Colorado. And I have these great big 8 foot long, 3 foot deep and 2 foot tall enclosures. And with Cryptic, they have a divider that you can kind of pull. So I do cohab them at home. There's 2 in each one of those setups. And then I'll tempt one over to the other side. I put the divider and I feed them. But, you know, even now at 8 foot, those were real expensive cages. I'm looking at them now thinking, like, we got to go bigger. So
Gotcha.
That's the thing about falsies, is that they're also a good snake, in my opinion. You don't have to have a pair. You don't have to breed them. But having like one as your showcase animal, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's quite a few people that do that. The other thing, just with this kind of random thing about false water cobras, I am one, you heard it here first. The market for falsies, it's going to get flooded real soon. Because when they have a clutch, you have an 8 foot animal, 6 to 8 foot snake. They don't have like 6 eggs. They have 30. And so, and they double clutch.
It's that big.
Yes. So I have the 2 females in my office. I bred 3 females last year, and I ended up with those 3 females with like 110 eggs.
Wow.
So
that's nuts.
Yeah. And in nature, they double clutch. It's not like you're not pushing them, you're not hurting them. There's lots of evidence to support that. But pretty soon, everybody that has a pair breeds them. So I've, when I sell mine, I'm just trying to get rat money. So if I know they're going to a good house, the price goes down. I'd much rather them go to somebody that's going to take care of them than, make a dime on them. But yeah, and I guess with morphs, there's several morphs that have come out in Europe. That's where most of the true morphs are. So you have lavenders, which are all produced from a single pairing of snakes in Italy. So we talk about outcrossing them, but in the end, to get a lav, you can do head-to-head and get lavs because it's a double recessive. But if you're breeding lav to lav, you're really not, there's no real hope for much outcrossing there. So they're not the most genetically strong animals. I will say that. You have a European hypo, which is an actual hypomelanistic where the melanin gene is reduced. So they're brown instead of black. And those animals are pretty cool. There's not many of those in the US, but there's quite a few over in Europe. And then you have something called the king morph, which is a really cool snake. I don't even know how to explain it. It's a high contrast, bright yellow, bright black, badass snake, but it maintains that phenotype until it reaches adulthood. And then in adulthood, they lose it and they kind of look like a normal adult false water.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then here in the States, we have what I call high yellow, what a lot of people in America call hypos. It's kind of like splitting hairs. In Europe, when you say hypomelanistic, you are actually talking about a gene that reduces the melanin. In America, when we say hypomelanistic for our lines, we simply mean that the black is reduced, but they still have the genes for black. So it's,
Got it.
but they have a tendency to have a tremendous amount of yellow, and they're bright. And that's where the high yellow to me seems like a better term. We have high black animals, which almost look like a xanthix, but that hasn't been proven out to be a genetic, a double recessive or anything like that. So,
right.
That's just all line bred stuff. And then we have normals or high contrast normals, which are really cool animals. So I tend to like what nature made a little bit more. Like there's scaleless over in Europe, and
I saw that picture in the book. That was interesting looking.
Yeah, and those are being, the guy that produced those is still breeding those. So those might be heading over here to the States sometime soon. Not sure.
Okay. And do they have belly scales like our, North American scaleless
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay.
So,
because I know that's like the debacle of why scaleless ball pythons don't do well. It's partly the belly scales and stuff. And, people, sometimes will, turn their back when I have my scaleless Texas rats. And I'm like, no, they're like, they're very functional, healthy animals. They act just the same as a normal. They're just lacking, the general body scales. They still have those belly scales though. So, yeah.
I don't know if the scaleless falsies have the ventral scales or not, to be honest with you.
Okay. Got it. There was a question, but I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in the big enclosure at the school, you said you co-have males together. They don't fight at all?
They do some dominance behaviors. Like there's definitely a dominant male in there. And the dominance behaviors look like mating. So it's, that's when we put the males together. I had undergrads in particular down here all the time. Like, why did you put them together to mate? And then I'm like, they're males. And then, confusion on faces comes from that. But I'm like, that's just a dominance behavior. Once they kind of get their pecking order out of the way, they're perfectly fine. And one area of research, we're doing it here. There's this whole subset of ethology research right now with snakes looking at this thing called boldness, looking at altruism, which is when you basically hang out with other individuals. And that enclosure it has 5 or 6 hides in it. And the boys have a tendency to be together all the time. And I don't know if that means like they like each other. They could be together because they're basically keeping tabs on each other for the dominance hierarchy.
Right.
That's the null to they like each other. But that's an area that we're actually going to be doing some research in. But as far as feeding response is concerned, fitness, robustness, all that, they're all fine. In fact, it's pretty interesting when you get into that enclosure with food. It's like a scene from Game of Thrones with the dragons, because as soon as they sense rat, they're all, up and out.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
no, that's awesome. And that's especially cool. I don't know if I knew you had that enclosure. You should definitely show it on social media a bit more.
I have.
But like after seeing, you have. Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of reels of it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, it's seeing because I was talking to Roy last week with his Soul Furious, and just having those big beautiful display enclosures, like I can only imagine with those false water cobras being such impressively big animals. I can only imagine that enclosure is just badass.
Well, it's funny because initially we had a sloth in it. So it was built for sloths. It was not built for false water cobras. And then we were moving this sloth between our partner zoo and the university, and it was doing fine. And then when winter came, the humidity dropped, and I, as the director, I basically said, "Listen, keep it at the zoo. We're fine." And we then had this like large showcase enclosure, and it didn't have anything in it, so we put Spilotes pilatus, not so furious. We got tiger rat snakes and threw them in there, and they were great. They weren't my timers. But they spent all damn day up like in their hide boxes. And so we moved those snakes on. Oh, we still have those, sorry. But I said, let's just put the boy false water cobras in there and see what happens. And they've been perfect because they're out moving around all the time. People like them. When we do tours, people are guaranteed to see them. By having 3 in there, one of them is almost always out doing something at any minute you walk in there because they are so engaging and interactive. And then we've done a lot of scent enrichment kind of stuff. I've done scent enrichment stuff where you take like mouse water and drip it around and then they like come out and trace it. This year before breeding season, this confused the hell out of everybody. One of my females in my office, she took a massive dump and I was like, okay, like it was fresh and I threw it in a little bowl and put a lid on it. And then I put it in the male enclosure because I just wanted to see if like the pheromones and everything, if I could get the males jazzed up. And so many people were so confused as to what the hell I was doing. Like, why is he taking the poop from there and putting it over there? And I had to explain. But it actually worked. Like the boys were definitely like female. There's a female around. And when I brought the male down to mate with that female, it was like an immediate lock. I think he was in there less than 2 minutes and he was locked up. So
awesome.
Yeah. And that's another thing I guess I should say about falsies. I say this in the book. I've said this on podcasts. They are the easiest snakes on earth to breed. They don't really have a season. So if you put a male with a female, he's going to try to mate with her. Now, you do need to cycle follicles with the females, and they do sperm storage. So that's why the males will mate, pretty much at any point in time. But it's almost immediate. In fact, I've sexed false water cobras before by I thought I had a male. I put it in with a female. There was absolutely no action. I took that male, put it in with a confirmed male, and then it immediately tried to start mating. And I was like, damn it, this is a female, not a male. So, so yeah, that's an element of their care that people don't realize getting into it is like, I don't really think there's much of a challenge. In fact, breeding some of my North American temperate colubrids is way more difficult than getting those false water cobras to breed.
Right, because arguably, with the brumacea, is it their natural habitat, like just that they don't really have to go? Do they have to go through any sort of brumation cycle per se?
That's where there's a little bit of debate amongst keepers. Probably they don't, to be totally honest. They have an incredibly wide range. They go from all the way up in northern Brazil, all the way down to northern Argentina. And that is a tremendous amount of real estate. So those more tropical animals, they're going to have a dry and a wet season, but there's not really going to be too much of a temperature differential.
Right.
When you get down to Paraguay and northern Argentina, there is more seasonality. It's kind of like South Carolina, where you have you got winter, but you don't really have winter, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So, so I am on team if it should brumate, because that's what the snakes evolved to do. So, if I can cool things down and mimic what they're doing in nature, that's what I do. And I can honestly say that it works because my, averaging 30 eggs a clutch, and then the second clutch is as big as the first clutch. We're doing something right here. So
right. Would you say almost those? So you take those northern localities, obviously, where you said it's more like dry and wet season, and with that, there's probably more and less food availability. And then you take this more southern ones where there's a bigger swing in temperature. Would you say almost that? You get the food cycling here and you get the temperature cycling here, and those are enough for each of the things to,
I food cycle mine too. I do pretty much what I was doing when I got into poplin carpets for a little while, and the whole feed them on a normal, whatever that is, feeding schedule over the summer, and then going into fall and winter, you kind of blast them.
Right.
I read every journal article I can get my hands on when it comes to false water cobras. And there's definitely evidence of there being a couple boom feeding times for them. And one of the booms is going into the dry season, and one of the other booms is at the beginning of the wet season. And so
Got it.
I basically, to brumate mine, all I do is I have herp stats on them, and I do the ramping and all that kind of jazz. But I give them an ambient of about 80, 81, and then a hot spot of about 84 degrees. And then every night I make sure during the summer with that same ambient, I drop them down to about 68 degrees. I try to hold them at 70 actually at night. And then going into winter, I will make the nighttime lower because I found that nighttime lows seem to make them go off feed more than anything. Like if it starts dropping down at nighttime below 68 degrees consistently, they will just stop eating on their own. And so I just, over a period of, every 2 weeks, I've got reminders in my phone that tell me to go do it. And I just simply drop them down. And then after I've initiated the brumation, about 4 weeks in, we get to our actual low temps. And then it's a high of about 74 during the day. And then it's a low of about 60 to 65. And then I hold that from about Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day, same dates you use for corn snakes and everything else. And then I start ramping them back up, but I start pairing them at the first of the year. So I do all my mating around January 1st. They mate, they store sperm. And then with that warming period, that's when I start just smashing the females with food. And one fun thing about a false water cobra female, if she is gravid, you can tell a lot of times because they're psychotic when they're around food to begin with. But one that has developing follicles is the literal definition of insanity. Like I have 2 in my office right now that I know are gravid. I walk in and they see my head and I hear ka-tunk because they're smashing off the glass to get fed.
Oh man.
And it's kind of fun because students will come in to my office and they don't know what are in those cages. And I've got these 2 giant snakes that are smashing their heads off the glass.
Yeah.
So it's built my mystique on campus. We'll just say that. And I don't want I don't want people to think they're like bleeding. It's a little tunk kind of thing.
Right. Of course.
But when the rats are in here and they smell them, the females that are gravid, I mean, they're literally doing laps. It's crazy. And I've kept dry marking, and dry marking, they have a strong feeding response, but in my opinion, it does not match what the gravid female false water cobras do.
Yeah.
They're on a level all their own. So
awesome. We did have a question in the chat. I will take questions when they're out there. Genetics nerd asks, Zach, what species of Nerodia do you keep? What are your favorites and why? Which would you suggest for other keepers and why?
Sure. If you're getting into Nerodia, well, first of all, I must bow to the master, which is Chris Montross of Dark Horse Herp. If you're interested in these, or Matt Dove, he's another great one. Those are the 2 guys that I get most of my Nerodia from. Go to those 2 because they're the best in herpetology when it comes to these. I'm just a lowly peon compared to those 2. But
there he is.
There he is. So, but what I would suggest is a good beginner Nerodia would be any of the fasciata complex. They don't get huge. They get big, but they don't get huge. You got Taxus spilota, the browns, erythrogasters, the red bellies, rhombifers, the diamondbacks. Those snakes can get big, and that's a lot of snake to deal with. But with the fasciata group, which is the broadbands, which are kind of out in the Gulf, you've got the banded water snakes, which are southern bandids, which are North Florida, and then they go up the East Coast, and then you get into peninsular Florida, and you get the Florida water snakes. Absolutely, those are the ones, and I just have them for fun. Like I keep all of mine in aquariums or vivariums with like drop down lid or doors, and they are so freaking interactive. They're like dogs. Like they get trained to take fish chunks off of forceps. They have really neat social structures. On this trip I just went to, it was really fun to collect them. And then I caught some that I got off of that looked identical to some of the animals I got from Chris. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
But I would definitely say the bandits. And then, everybody likes the mangroves. I have those right now. I have both subspecies of those. But they're compared to the fasciata, they're just a little tiny bit trickier. But those would be the ones that I would go for. And talk about an underrated snake. Like I went to Florida herping with some people a couple years ago, and they're like, "Oh, it's just a Florida water snake." And I just think that's the most insulting thing you can possibly say. I stopped for every single one of them because they're so polymorphic. They remind me of Irian giant carpets because the color scheme's kind of similar. And they kind of feel that same niche where, like in the carpet world, it's just a poplin. But if you actually look at the poplins, they're probably the coolest of the carpets. So, that's it with Nerodia. I know I'm all over the place, but that's what happens when I get excited. I absolutely love those things.
No, so. I will say Chris's page has definitely made me appreciate Nerodia more. Seeing his stuff is definitely cool because there's more out there, more color palettes, like you're mentioning, that I don't think people know exist on these snakes.
Yeah. And anybody interested in him, you got to go to Montross and he's like a drug dealer, dude. He pushes it and you will succumb. So.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And then the next species I wanted to talk about that you have, and also another species from the book, are some Barons racers. So, so you're keeping those. And I gotta say, I saw probably the coolest individual in a picture in that book, which was that very melanistic one.
Yep.
I have never seen any that look like that. I've heard that there are some black Barons out there, but that's the first picture I've seen of one. Talk about your Barons, what you're kind of doing with those guys. And
sure.
Yeah.
So Baron Eye is another one that if I'm keeping it, it's living in a Viv. You can totally keep them in a rack. And people do that. I just don't like keeping them in a rack. They're semi-arboreal is probably the best way to describe them in South America where they live naturally. And they spend a lot of time about 3 feet to 10 feet off the ground. So they're not like truly arboreal up in the canopy, but they live in that kind of herbaceous shrub zone, and they're just picking off birds left and right, and other reptiles and the occasional mammal. So because that's the data that I got when I was looking them all up for the book, that's the way that we keep them here at the university. And then I have we've made a couple clutches here at school, and we've only made one blue Baron Eye. And I was like, that is mine. So that went back home, and that's my Barons racer that lives at my house. But
nice.
We keep them in 6 foot long Vivs. We bought a bunch of black box Vivs for them. So everybody knows black box now. So we've got 6 foot long, 2 foot tall, 2 foot deep. And once again, the thing people don't know about Baron Eye is that the damn things get huge. We have a 7 foot female that is longer than her 6 foot cage, and she's an impressive animal. But what they do, like a lot of those kind of wiry racer like snakes, is they cram into like the smallest little spaces. So because of that, we have vertical hides, the hides that you mount on the top of the enclosure.
Right.
And a lot of times they spend a lot of time in those hides, and they will dangle the first 2 feet of their bodies out of the hide.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really cool. And whenever they're doing that, they're hunting. We have learned that if they're doing that, they probably want fed. We have one here that is the anti-Baron Eye. It doesn't like to eat. But whenever we see it doing that, it's like immediately drop everything, go get a mouse, feed the snake. So
got it.
And it eats almost all the time that it does that. So so that would be the thing with their care. The temperature regime I talked about with false water cobras is identical to what we do with the Barons racers. So
got it.
To brumate them, all we really do, to be brutally honest, is we just unplug the thermostats and let them drop down to room temp, because they make it a little bit farther south than the gigas do.
Okay.
And then as far as care, feeding, birds. A lot of people give them rodents, but there's been quite a few studies that show in nature they're nest robbers. In fact, there's a parrot, and I found this a little bit fascinating, and I love this story. When I was doing the research for the book, you go to Google Scholar, you type in a Latin name, and then you get all these hits. And I got this return from a really well-known bird journal, and I was like, wow. Bird journal? What the hell? And then here, come to find out that Bear and I are responsible for a parrot staying endangered, because the bear and I have figured out how to go into the nests and get the baby parrots. And they will, a big female will go into a parrot nest and eat all 4 or 5 babies at once. So we try to feed them quail, and we do multiple small quail, but we also feed them small rats and mice. So varied diet kind of thing.
Okay.
And then the other thing for Bear and I think is important is a basking light. They do seem to enjoy coiled up classic basking underneath a lamp. The false water cobras, in my experience, they'll bask, especially when they're gravid. But when they're outside of being gravid, occasional basking. Bear and I have a set routine where light comes on in the morning. It's on for like half an hour. Bear and I go underneath it for an hour. They're warmed up. They cruise, and they go back to their vertical hide for the rest of the day. So,
okay.
But yeah, that's that. And with Barron's racers, I think that there are a couple lines that produce babies that are great feeders. And I think that there are more lines that produce babies that just want to die. And we have the I want to die line here at West Liberty, because I have a hell of a time getting the babies to eat. And I was at Tinley with the book, and there were a bunch of, peeps there at Russ Gurley's table. And I was talking to them, and, one of the guys had 20 Barron's racers, and he was telling me how some of them eat right away as babies and others do not. So that's called boldness. And I think that if we're going to do Bear and I any service, yes, they're pretty, but let's breed for behavior first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And get strong feeding responses out of these things, because I can tell you that I ripped my hair out trying to get the Bear and I to eat here. The only thing that seems to work is it's a very old school trick. But it's a live pinky in a brown bag with the baby Bear and I in a brown bag. I curl up the bag, staple the bag shut, and then I put them in a tub, and I actually put a heating pad in the tub and a thermostat, and I crank the heat. So I hold them at about 87 degrees.
Okay.
And so their metabolism's just ripping. And that is what I have to do to get hours to eat. I told some people that, and they looked at me like I was insane. But it works, and I'm not changing it. And it took me about 2 clutches to figure out what the hell we had to do to get these things to eat. So,
wow. Okay.
So that's that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you about, breeding for that kind of behavior. And that's arguably that's better for the hobby as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I could say, I know that about there's a couple of ball python mutations actually that are known to be not so great eaters. And I've heard, people had to put down a whole clutch because they're all not eating. So yeah, I totally agree. It's very imperative to kind of breed for that behavior, because obviously you want, your best eating offspring to continue.
No, absolutely. That's part of the reason why we're getting into the boldness research here, because with boldness, that's basically how, does the snake flinch in the presence of the person? This is boldness for West Liberty. This is not boldness based off the science that people are doing. But what I'm interested in is being able to show there's a genetic constituents to that. All right, I'm out and about. There's a person here. I'm not hyper defensive, and I want to eat. And we know there is. I'm not saying we're doing something earth shattering, but I think if we had some legit documentation of it scientifically, people might, buy into it. So I have a graduate student named Mackenzie Dobb, and her thesis, that's why I bred all the false water cobras. I did not need to breed that many false water cobras, but for her thesis, we paired up adults that were super bold, kind of bold, and shy. And we haven't done the analysis yet.
Okay.
But stay tuned on that. But we have some evidence. I'll say that. That's kind of supporting that is kind of being passed from parents to adults. Sorry, from parents to the kids, which is pretty cool.
That's cool. I'm excited to hear the results when you get that. We of course got the unicorn snake question, Baroni versus Blenderi. So is it Barons? Well, based on our conversation before we started, your answer leans Barons. Yeah,
it's Barons. And I did this on my podcast, and ye almighty Rob Stone messaged me and was like, "Come on, man, why are you like keeping this debate alive?" So I'm sorry, Rob, if you listen to this, but
no, it's all right. Within my first few episodes of this, I had Rhino and Barons keepers, so I had to ask every single person the question. So
no,
yeah,
so I'm not dogging on rhinos. And like I said before we started recording, there's no reason why I shouldn't love rhinos. Aquatic snakes, it's the only aquatic rat snake. I love oddball snakes. It's the oddest of oddball rat snakes, and they're cool as crap, to look at, but they just don't do it for me. I don't know what it is, but with the Barons racers, I think it's the fact that they're dipsadids. I love dipsadids. The evolutionary history of them is a big thing for me. They're rear-fanged, and the constituents of their Duvernoy's gland, it's rough. Like, you do not want to get bit by Baroni. That is not kosher. It drives me. I lose my mind when I'm on Instagram and I see somebody with a Barons racer up by their face. So there's that. There's a challenge there, and there is a challenge with the rhino rats. You got to start with the minnows and go to the piggies, and But with my Baroni anyway, getting the damn things to eat is like climbing Mount Improbable. But then once they start eating, they're insane. They go from I don't want food to you can't give me enough food. There's no snake that I have kept that once you flip that on switch, they're on for pretty much the rest of their life. So I like that. And then I like the setups. They are a really cool display snake. So I will be, and they come in more colors than just green. You can get brown and black and blue.
No, I can definitely say
so
in holding, I've held Barons. One of my other past guests, his name is funny enough, Kevin Barron. He has some Barons racers. Mm-hmm. He has some Barons racers. I got to go to his house and check them out. And I will say, along the lines of what you said, I was a little wary to hold them because of that, the rear fang thing. But they chilled out once I had them in my hand. But man, between the powder blue and even the brown, you think brown's an ugly color, but no, those brown snakes are very cool. Just that solid, just the way it is. It's very bold and pretty. And then speaking of that, what I wanted to lead into before we kind of dropped it, and I want to talk about hognose after. How is it being a professor, having all these, students being hands-on with a bunch of these rear fang species where arguably you do have to be a little bit more careful?
So there's only select students that get to work with the Baroni and the false water cobras. You are not working with those animals until you are a senior, or you're what we call a mentor. So there's so many students here that we had to come up with some kind of hierarchical strategy with the animal collection. So in the animal collection, there are animals that are labeled beginners, there's animals that are intermediates, and then there's expert. And of course, all the rear fanged are expert. We even treat our hognose snakes as expert because we'll talk about this shortly. Some of the bites from a flipping hognose snake if you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think they got bit by a copperhead. Like they're rough.
Yeah.
And so they're all, you got to work your way up. The graduate students work with the bear and I, and then the staff work with the bear and I, and we are hands off. So nobody is going in there hand over hand with these snakes. Everything is with 3-foot tongs and hooks, and there has to be somebody else present. So we basically treat them the way zoos treat a pit viper. And by doing that, we're able to avoid, accidents and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's the way that works. But you have to be here at least 2 years before you're moving in and working with those animals.
Right. Yeah. And, I've said it before on past episodes, and I hate to, I don't want to like fearmonger rear-fanged species. However, like it is a genuine concern, and I feel like sometimes, especially even with hognose, it is kind of written off as it's like, oh, whatever, it's a hognose. Where I do feel like, like I said, even holding those barons, I was a little wary to do it because, I just don't want to, be on the wrong end of the snake that day.
Yeah. The thing is, there's fear mongering, and then there's which we don't want to necessarily do.
Of course.
But there's also a lack of respect. And what I see definitely with hogs, with barons racers, with false water cobras, with all these rear fanged animals, is that there's kind of this, oh, it's just a bee sting. It's not a bee sting. It's a completely different, type of reaction. And so what I preach is respect the animal. And, you don't need the Instagram pic of you looking whatever the hell with a mangrove snake by your face and your nose ring gleaming in the sun. Like, what the hell is that crap? Just don't do that. Because what's going to happen is someone's going to get bit in a bad place. And then what are they going to do? The other thing that drives me insane, and this is almost therapy for me, is when somebody does get bit by one of these snakes. And now I'm a scientist and I'm taking notes every 10 minutes after I get bit, photo documenting it, putting it up on the internet. Because I can tell you that, like, yes, people can see what happened to you, but at the same time, like, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Because if you respected the snake, it probably wouldn't have happened. Now, do I occasionally get nailed by a false water cobra? Yes, I do. When we sex the little ones, it's very difficult to just manipulate them, but I don't put that up for people to see. I keep that to me, and I'm the one that made the mistake. And so I think we need to respect these animals more.
Yeah.
Especially the hogs. Because I can tell you, with the complete guide to hognose snakes, I have every intention of having the goriest pictures I can possibly find of what the hell a nasicus can do to someone, because the hognose snake bites are way worse than the worst false water cobra bite that I've been able to find. So,
Okay.
But we don't need to be booping snoots and doing all that garbage either. Like, Jesus Christ. So
I'm with you.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now let's talk about the hognose a little bit.
Sure.
The species you're keeping, and I know that is a book that you're writing on the horizon, just specifically just hognose. So let's talk about them and what you're working with.
Sure. I'm not a morph guy. People can have morphs. I have no problem with people having morphs. I think that in a lot of ways, my localities are very similar to the concept of a morph. So, so I don't want people to think that I'm like poo-poo that. But with me, it's more about the husbandry of hogs. That's what I find really interesting, because I've gone out into the wild and found these animals in Minnesota and Colorado. I tried to find them in Kansas and got my ass thoroughly kicked by them. Didn't find a single one. But in Colorado and Minnesota anyway, when I saw them in the wild doing what they do in the wild, I walked around with biologists that studied them and had radio transmitters in them, and heard them talking about like what they actually saw them doing and everything. It just took what I thought I knew about hognose snakes and completely obliterated it. And I thought, good God, these things are so freaking cool. And people, if they kept them a different way, and they did this naturalistic style of keeping with heterodon, I think like I just felt like that would be such a better experience. Same time, a lot of people, especially breeders, keep them in racks. And I was talking about how I was anti-rack with falsies. With hogs, especially the males, they don't get big. So that's a species of snake that the dimensions of a rack tub gives them tons of space. There's the whole light heating issue. We're not going to get into that. But as far as a mass breeding scenario is concerned, rack keeping for them is probably, it's cool. So that element of heterodon is what I like. And I love their natural history, and they're freaking dipsadids. So they're like the North American version of the snakes I wrote a book on in South America. So for me, I thought it was important that I keep all of them. So I have Easterns, but I have permission to keep them from our DNR. And then I have Southerns, Mexicans, and then of course we have all the plains hogs. And what I love about hognose snakes is that they're easy to breed. They're a good beginner snake, kinda, but I would kind of put them at the upper echelon of beginner. And then they've got that whole, like, there's this perception of what a hognose is, and then there's the reality of what a hognose is. And I really like that element of herpetoculture. And I feel like my job, like my niche space, to use an ecological term, is to take that perception and move it into the reality of what they actually are, if you know what I mean. So but they're just, I love them. And then they have the Thanatosis where they play dead. They're feeding specialists. The Westerns live all the way down in like Oklahoma and Texas, all the way up to Alberta. Like, that's such crazy, insane distribution. And then they live in the prairie, and I'd never spent any time in a prairie until last year. And I found out that I really like the prairie, and I really like herpet in the prairie. And so I'm jazzed to get going on the book. I have many things I need to write. I have a bunch of grants that have come to an end, and the reports are due. And I have to spend this month and next month writing those reports. And I literally have right over there the 400 articles I need to read to get this book going. And I have to like do a mantra every damn day, like, focus, get the publications done, then you can write the book. It's a difference between a want and a need. So, and then for the book, I ended up having to I had a problem, which is if you're doing a complete guide, you have to cover morphs. There's no way you can't. And if there's a colubrid that rivals corn snakes for morphs and rivals ball pythons for morphs, it's the hognose snakes. And I was like, what am I going to do? I cannot learn this. So I'm actually bringing a co-author on for that book, and it's John Rice. We had him on Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. We clicked on the podcast, and then I was sitting here and I was like, I can't do this. I'll get my natural history, naturalistic keeping part written by like December. And then I'm going to spend the next 3 years of my life trying to do this morph thing. And it's going to suck because I'm not good at it. And so I reached out to John, and he agreed. And I'm so freaking happy that he did. So he's already ripping and roaring. So this is not just me. This is me and John on this one.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and it's quite impressive with the the morph side of Western hogs, because I feel like there's been this boom of popularity, and honestly, from what I've seen in terms of popularity, I feel like it's almost rivaling corns. And that's not a species I thought could ever be like overtaken on the colubrid side when it came to morphs and combinations and sheer just numbers.
Yeah, I have to say I love corn snakes. I'm sorry to Justin and Chris and the Corn Star crew. but I feel like there might be more potential with hognose snakes on that plane, because a corn snake gets big, and like a hog maxes out at about 16, 18 inches. You can get them bigger. I have one,
Yeah.
That is actually 3 feet. It is monstrous, but
Yeah.
they're just kind of better suited, in my opinion, for a captive environment. And anybody can have them. But the problem, and this is what I find so interesting about it, is they are rear fanged.
Yep.
And if you're giving an 8-year-old a hognose snake and it smells like a mouse and it gets bit, you could potentially have a reaction. You don't have that with the corn snakes. So,
yep.
So I don't know which is better, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that's where I stand on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I have actually, being that I'm not a morph person, there are a couple hognose snake morphs that I'm like, yeah, I might have to get those.
And
there are
as far as
lemon ghosts are in my future. So.
Okay. Nice. And as far as I've been told, I believe some of the morphs are actually locality specific.
Yes.
Like they came out of locality stock. So yeah.
Yep. Evans hypos. I don't remember where, but I have those.
Okay.
So yeah, and I've dabbled in the morphs. Don't get me wrong. But I spent about a week trying to learn them, and I think it's literally math. The morph part of the hobby to me is like my genetics class with Punnett squares and Mendelian.
Yes.
And there's a math element there. And I would just much rather be able to be like, Pasco County, Florida Kings, man, they came from this county and this habitat, and that's all I got to know. I don't have to know if it's an incomplete dominant or a double header, like all that. Yeah. So I really think that's what it boils down to with me. So.
Yeah, and me knowing ball pythons, I know odds like that. You got to be quick with it.
Nope. No.
I know my odds chances without plugging into the morph market calculator.
Yeah.
So
no.
Yeah,
you are better than me, sir, when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, and like you were saying, you just started talking about the Kings. I'm very curious because I know that's become a big obsession of yours. What is it, over the last couple of years or so? You've collected more and more.
It's not okay. I had my Asian rats, and then and serendipitously was like, these things are not working out, and so I moved them all out in like a 2-month period of time, and I had a lot of Asian rats, which meant I had a lot of space. And we all know what happens when herpetoculture peeps have space. Which is
fill it back up.
It's just possibility. And I knew that at home, I made a conscious decision. Like, I don't want stuff that isn't going to eat. I want easy at home. And I had kind of been dabbling with locality stuff a little bit. I had listened to Chris on a couple podcasts, and I thought, I might be able to get into this. This might be an element of herpetoculture that I like. And I got locality stuff from Chris. I think my first official group I got a Brooks King, just a random generic Brooks King in a trade for a false water cobra. And they still have him. He's just, he's not a locality Brooks eye. He's a herpetoculture Brooks eye. So just light yellow, reduced banding, snake. And
now, if you don't mind, before we get farther, because you and I actually had this conversation, I think on a comment thread. I think I commented on one of your posts once. So the difference between Brooks Eye and Floridana, because they are pretty similar, is it just the locale? So Brooks Eye are the farther south ones, like South Florida, essentially.
Yeah, okay. Brooks Eye is taxonomically been disbound. Like it no longer is recognized by the powers that be. And that is based off of genetics that quite clearly show that there's not even really much of a signature, a phenotypic or phylogeographic signature that isolates South Florida animals. And what you actually have, which nobody talks about, is it's just what we call a cline. So when you're in extreme southern Florida, you've got the very light colored yellows, whitish yellows and orange with the kind of reduced black banding, and melanin is reduced. And then simply as you work your way north, you get more and more and more and more melanin until you're up in like Hernando County, and then in north of there, Pasco County, Pinellas County,
Right.
and that's when you get much more of a melanin influence. And a lot of people call those intergrade kings. There's one idea that it's kind of pulling in the Getula look, which is the chain king look, and mixing it with the Floridana look. I've read a couple papers. There's not one paper said this could be what's happening. Another paper didn't make a mention, but I know how to read those graphs, and it really wasn't showing much integration. So I don't know what the hell the deal is there. But for classic Brookside, though, you just have the reduced black banding, and everything is kind of light color. Dade County, Florida, is kind of the classic county where if you get them out of Dade County, you pretty much have what we would call a Brooks King. My son and I went to Florida or my family went to Florida. I took Colin to Loop Road. Everybody goes to Loop Road, so I don't think I'm like letting anything out of the bag. I just wanted to find cottonmouths and water snakes. Because, and we were leaving, and we were literally, if you drive Loop, we were heading back towards Homestead, and there's an area where it goes from like gravelly dirt to blacktop. And right in that general area, I saw a snake on the road and got all excited because all we had seen up till then were cottonmouths. So we couldn't pick anything up. And I, slammed the car like we do. And I ran out, and I first looked at it and was like, that is the coolest Florida green water snake I've ever seen. And then I got on top of it and I realized it was a freaking king snake. And I think that they could hear me in Miami. I was like bouncing. And nice. So I took a bunch of really crappy pictures, and there were some people that said that animal was a Brookside. So I thought it was just a really cool looking Floridana. So the point of this is there's a little bit of murk when it comes to really defining Brookside. But for me, in the Florida King people, there's like just Brookside Kings, which is that kind of archetype phenotype. But then there's the locality Brookside, which do look different, in my opinion, than a classic Brookside.
Yeah. And the reason why I think I've been so confused over the years, because I grew up working in that pet shop, and we had, I guess, what you'd call Florida Kings. And I think we used to label them as Brookside. My boss did, but that was also years ago. So I don't know when the taxonomy changed or whatever, but so I had Brookside and Florida King like just intertwined in my head together. So yeah.
So but I personally, the look that I like is the look that Chris Montross produces out of Hendry County, which is, I like the kind of brown, dirty looking thug look, the like just diesel beast of a king snake look. That's always been my favorite. And Chris produced some Hendry County animals, and I got a pair of those, and then I bought the Dade counties, and then I believe he had a Liberty County Means Eye, and I bought those, and then he phased his out, and I got most of his kings as he was phasing those out, because you can't get better locality animals than straight from Chris Montross. And then I got the Pinellas, which is a wonderful phenotype and locality. There's the wide-banded Pinellas, which is probably my favorite of all the localities. And I actually paired mine up yesterday, and the male immediately started mating with the female, so that was pretty badass. I haven't produced those yet. But then and then I have Hernando's and Pasco counties, and I'm looking for a couple still. I think it's Levi County, Dixie County. But I just like them because they're easy, they're fun. They're basically the North American version of a freaking false water cobra. They're insane. My poor kid, his weekly chore is doing water bowls while I run around. And we were doing water bowls today, and I just woke my snakes up last week. And I hear Colin just screaming from the garage, like, this, damn it, and he's got one hanging off his thumb. So, I love that about them. And that whole Mithropeltis, as Justin Smith says, that to me is endearing. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all right. I work with Texas rats, the most aggressive snake
Yeah.
ever. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just mean.
No, except they're not, because mine aren't. None of my adults bite me. It's the most mythological thing I've ever heard, because I swear they all all of mine personally tame down as adults. I do not get bit by adults, only hatchlings. Once they're past that, it's all
They're
good.
like false water cobras. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. So that's I would say that's a pretty solid picture of a lot of the animals you keep. And obviously, you could probably go on about a lot more
Mhm.
species, but I don't want to hold you here all night. Kind of want to get into the next segment, where I call the All Other Reptiles Freestyle. Do you have any other reptiles that aren't colubrids or colubroids in large numbers, or you have some here and there?
I have onesies and twosies.
Okay.
So my son he's not into this the same level as me, but he definitely likes lizards more than snakes. And so we have a pair of northern blue tongue skinks. We have a bearded dragon at home.
Okay.
I actually got back into herpetoculture with crested geckos of all things.
Okay.
And I have a soft spot for cresteds because I was in herpetoculture when cresteds came back in, like when they were rediscovered. And I distinctly remember being in the Columbus reptile show at Don Hamper's table, looking at the first crested geckos that had made it to Ohio and were like $10,000 a piece, and just being blown away by how awesome that animal looked. And so I will always have cresteds, and they're in bioactive vids. Those are the only things I do bioactive. Everything else is just naturalistic. And then for me personally, I have a blue tegu. I love tegus.
Nice.
Actually, now I'm more of a tegu person than a monitor person, which is blasphemous for a lot of people. But here at the university, we have, how many of those things do we have? We have 4 blue tegus. And then I thought that I would get a backup male. So I have a male that I got off of Russ. That's just a pet at home.
Okay.
And then I would say my absolute favorite non-snakes that I own are my Gilas. That was a dream animal for me. When you herp, everybody seems to have a rare herp that they just can find. And mine is Gila monsters. I've been to the desert twice when you were not supposed to find Gilas, and I found Gilas.
Okay.
Without even looking for Gilas. So I was like, it's meant to be. So I think I can never remember which ones I have. I think it's bandids. It's whichever one's the most common. So, and they're just fantastic animals. I love those things to death.
Yeah.
So I have a pair. I have a male and a female. And that is it. I'm going with my job. I'm building a conservation center right now, and we just joined the AZA SAFE, Saving Animals from Extinction, for North American freshwater turtles. So they're not my pets; they're part of SAFE. But I have been reading and learning as much as I can about turtles, and we went from having like a couple turtles to quite a few spotted turtles, wood turtles, box turtles. Yeah, but we have to we have some Asian turtles we need to kind of move, and we don't want to necessarily put them back into the pet trade. So I think that I'm about to have some turtles that I didn't know I was going to have coming to the house soon. So that's it.
Gotcha. Cool. Wanted to hit this. Christian asked, do you still have the Japanese rats, which was in the thumbnail? Hold on, I'll pull it back up. It's a photo. I stole that off your Instagram, but
that was the first
that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They are the only Asian rat snakes that I kept. They are my favorite rat snake. I love Japanese rat snakes. I will never not have Japanese rat snakes. And I like, I'm the oddball. A lot of people go nuts over the Kunisher Island, but I like the classic mainland Japanese rats. So I currently have 2.2 of those.
Yeah.
In fact, I was at Tinley, and I told myself when I went to Tinley, like, I'm not buying anything And Ashley Denizen, who is an importer, she had a line of Japanese rat snakes that she had imported from Europe that were supposedly different than anything we had here in the States. And I was like, yeah, those have to be mine. So I ended up breaking my own damn rule, and I bought my other, two of them there. So I hope to have more Japanese rat snakes by the end of this year too.
Awesome. Yeah, and they're pretty cool. And I'm definitely interested. Billy Hunt made me interested in them. And he was right when he said on this show they're very even just like body structure and look, they're probably the most similar thing to our North American rat snakes. Like you just look at their head and all I see is Everglades rat, Texas rat, all our Pantherophis. So it's pretty cool.
And they're fun. They're very inquisitive. They're a great display snake. If you put those in a 4x2x2, they will use every inch of it. That's how I was keeping them for a long time. And then I temporarily moved them into a rack system, and I felt like such a piece of crap for having them in there that I dropped like an enormous amount of money to get PVC cages for them so they could go back into the cages.
Right.
So, but no, they're great. I can't say enough good things about them.
Cool. So, getting off snakes a little bit, I wanted you to talk about, those things in pictures behind you, the crayfish, as your name, your Instagram name, which is also in the description. So go follow Zac on Instagram. Dr. Crawdad, please talk about that a little bit.
Well, I love them. I love them just as much as I love snakes. Snakes and crayfish are my two professional loves. And I got into crayfish because when I was in graduate school in the early 2000s, that's when Steve Irwin was all over the TV, Jeff Corwin, Mark O'Shea. Snakes were actually, it was cool and trendy to study snakes and be a snake person. And I was getting my master's degree on snakes. And I was, I was married. I wanted to start a family. And I realized that I was going to have to get a PhD. At the time, I didn't want a PhD. And that the job market for to be a snake biologist, kind of like it is today, was super saturated and insanely cutthroat. And my advisor, Dr. Tom Polly, gave me the best advice ever. We were driving home we were down there catching salamanders on a different project. And we had a 2.5-hour drive back through southern West Virginia's mountains. And I loved just driving with him because he would tell stories and we would talk about herping and everything. And he said to me, I watched you for the past year and you think you have to study snakes and you don't. You can nerd out on anything. So pick something nobody else studies, nerd out on it, be the person. You'll never have to worry about funding or anything like that again. And so I ended up getting a bunch of crayfish and traps I had for salamanders. I ended up keying them out, studying them, and I found out that their natural history was pretty much unknown. And a lot of the methods that I had learned that you could apply to salamanders and frogs and lizards, not so much snakes, but those animals and small turtles, crayfish get big enough that you can do the same type of science with them that I was doing with herps. And then I went to the literature and was like, nobody's doing this. And then the final pin was, it sucks to be this way, but if you want to get funding, a lot of times you need to study animals that are endangered. And I say this and people roll their eyes and they're like, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I am freaking Dr. Crawdad. I know what I'm talking about. There are over 450 species of crayfish in North America.
Wow.
And about the statistic changes based off of who does the math, but 40 to 60% of them are endangered because they are insanely endemic. So they may live in one river. They may live in one tributary of one river. So anything happens in that tributary, they become endangered. Once they become endangered, there's a funding stream to get them off of lists. And so they were a lucrative group of organisms for me to study because I would be able to get funding. And that meant that there was a need for me as a biologist. And so that's not the main reason why I did it. It was wonderful circumstance. But it was the most important decision I made professionally. And now I have the crayfish lab. I just got, we've been doing it forever, but I got, over $1 million to build a conservation center to raise crayfish, so, and then the other thing is, since so little's been done with them, I get to do everything biologists want to do in their career. So like, I never thought I was going to name new species. I didn't think that was in the cards for me. I held those people like up here, like, and then I'm doing surveys and I'm catching these crawdads and I'm like, what the hell is this thing? I don't know what this is. And then I'm talking to my crayfish mentors and they're just like I'm talking to you. Oh, that's probably undescribed. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, I just found a new species in this guy's backyard. And they're like, yeah. And so, the lab is named 15 new crayfish. I have a crayfish named after me. And then when you name it, you're the expert of it at that point in time. And if it's endangered, you then immediately turn around and can say, all right, so we didn't know this was a species. Now we know it's a species and we know it only lives here. It's extremely imperiled. We need to now figure out if this really is the only place it lives. So then you write a grant, you get funding, and now I get paid to go look for it some more. And then when I do that, we find another new species. And it's just this like perpetual feedback loop. And when we're out there, obviously you're finding snakes and turtles and everything else you want to look for. So it is a perfect fit. And then with crawdads, crayfish and herps are intimately linked because crayfish dig burrows and snakes and frogs and even turtles, we've now found out, will go down in those burrows and use the burrows. So I get to do like Massasauga rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania. They only occur where there's burrowing crayfish. My lab did a study where we found all the burrowing crayfish in Western Pennsylvania. And then the DNR turned around and came to us and were like, what, is there any way that you could like help us with Massasaugas? And I was like, excuse me, you want me to do what? I was like, so, so no, it's a match made in heaven. So,
very cool. Now, forgive my ignorance, but when it comes to that funding, so when it comes to like crayfish stuff, is that from like federal government, like wildlife organizations?
It's from all over the place, to be honest with you. So a lot of my funding comes from this pot of money, which technically is a federal pot of money. It's called a SWIG. It's called SWIG, which is your state wildlife grant program. And so every state has a non-game wildlife program, and that includes all the animals that you do not buy a license to shoot with a gun or catch with a fishing hook. We call those animals hook and bullet species. So these non-game species, they have, and that includes pretty much most of the reptiles and amphibians, they have biologists that go out for the state and they survey and sample and do all that. And then they ultimately get something called a conservation rank. And so there's these other species that are called SGCN, species of greatest conservation concern. I got the SGCN part wrong there. But anyway, and every taxa goes through a rubric and it gets a ranking. And so if you're an S4, S5 species, you're considered common. So a robin would be an S4, S5. If you're S3, a lot of times you're considered special concern, or another term for special concern. And then there's S2, S1, which a lot of times corresponds to being threatened if you're S2, endangered if you're S1. And so those S3, S2, S1 species, they qualify for funding. And there's a lot of people that want to study snakes. There's literally 4 people right now who do SWIG grants for multiple states. And I'm one of those 4. So whenever the state of Georgia needs their crayfish done, they don't have a crayfish expert. So they ask around, and then somebody invariably goes, oh, there's this guy at this little school in Northern West Virginia named Zach. And the next thing you know, I'm talking to them, and then we write a grant, and now I'm going to Georgia. You see what I'm saying? So, and it's also the crayfish. I've done crayfish work in Maryland, Pennsylvania, both of the Virginias, North and South Carolina. I've done a lot. I did some work in Texas, Ohio. I use Georgia because I just submitted a grant with a bunch of other people. And if we get it, I'm going to Georgia. You know, twist my arm, I get to go to swamps, my favorite habitat, catch crawdads and trip over cottonmouths in the rodeo. Like it doesn't get better than that for me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And then of course my goal being a teacher is I want to teach. I want there to be 20 to 30 crayfish biologists when I die instead of the limited pool we have now. Cause that's the only way that crayfish can really get the conservation that they need.
Right. Very cool. Now, and yes, now going back to you being a professor, I am quite curious what like your course curriculum kind of entails being in this zoo science and focusing specifically on reptiles. Can you kind of dive into what is actually taught in this kind of coursework?
I'm going to say right now that we do teach about birds, mammals.
Okay.
We do there's an aquarium science track. Cool. There's a conservation track for the kids that get in and they decide they don't want to work in a zoo. So they can kind of kick over and do what I was trained to do, which is field biology. But my responsibilities, teaching wise, is I do all of the reptile and amphibian stuff. I do all the herpetoculture stuff. And then I teach conservation biology and ecology. So for ZooSci, I am at a small school. And so when you're a prof at a small school, you don't have a research position. So a lot of people know, Dr. Justin Julander is a name that we know. Dr. Warren Booth is a name we know. They have a different job than me. They have what's called a research professorship. So they're at a school. They might teach one class a year, but their job is to write grants and crank out pubs. I'm at a teaching institution. So I have to teach and then I do the research. And I do the research because I love to do research. I don't have to do the research. Okay. But it's why I got these degrees and damn it, I'm going to do it. And it's what gets me out into the world. Yeah. And so that's why we do it. But for me, I teach for herpetology. I do two courses. It's got the one is an undergraduate course and it's called herpetology and herpetoculture. And I thought it was important to make the course's name have herpetoculture. That's kind of my way to twist the knife a little bit with this whole herpetoculture is an academic. Well, if kids have it on a college transcript, it is. So there you go. And then the graduate class, it may actually just be called herpetoculture. I don't remember what we called it or herpetology, but the way that those courses work is the lecture is a classic herpetology class. You are learning phylogenies, cladograms, anatomy, evolution, behavior, ecology, and a crap load of taxonomy. And then in the lab, that's where it differs from a normal herp class. In the lab, the students that take the course are building a viv. They are, I wrote a manuscript about evidence-based husbandry. So everybody has to read that paper and I make everybody do the protocol in the paper. And it teaches you how to basically pick a reptile or amphibian and go out and learn everything you can about it before you bring it in and then use that to guide the enclosure setup. So everybody in the course has to do that. There's practicals. So I give 2 herpetoculture tests. Okay. Like I have a test on UVB that would challenge any keyboard warrior's knowledge of UVB. My students have to do the pathways with calcitriol, calcidiol, UVA, UVB, how they're interacting. So, it's intense. There's a history of herpetoculture in the lab. And then we have a lecture on plants, a 3-hour lab on plants where we go over all the plants that you can use, why this is a good one, why this is a bad one. We have one on enclosure design. We have one on substrates. We have a lab on feeding. We have a lab on cycling and breeding. We have a lab on incubation. And then I haven't been able to pull this off yet, but my plan for next semester is to actually get out and do some conservation projects with some salamanders and turtles. So it's intense. And the students that take it, they either love it to death or they despise it with a passion unknown to mankind because I cram is like I hit you with a fire hose on day 1 and I turn it off when you turn in your final. Like that's the way it is. So
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And over the course of, the CCR episodes, it's been really interesting to hear, some of your students like theses,
Uh-huh.
and how you're working with those. Like, I think that's cool that you're able to, one, help culture this knowledge within these individuals, and also maybe come up with something new, or
Yeah.
like just, create a cool experiment in science to kind of work on that. So your work is very much appreciated. I just think it's overall very cool.
Oh, well, thank you, man.
Yeah.
No, the big thing that people need to know is that it's not normal for a professor to have two giant research efforts going on at once, like trying to keep the crayfish plate spinning and the herpetoculture plate spinning, and they both would be a normal person's like sole thing they did. So with the herpetoculture, I couldn't do it without finding collaborators and people that would work with us. And we have now formed collaboration with the Orion Society, or Orion Center for Indigo Conservation, which is part of the Central Florida Zoo.
Yes.
And so Dr. Bogan's there. He's amazing. He's one of my favorite people in herpetoculture. And so he basically kind of comes up with ideas, feeds those ideas to me. I recruit a student, and then we work together to get them through their grad degree. And that we've done that now with Pei, who that's one of my favorite things about the podcast, because when I started the podcast, Pei had just started. So if you like listen in order, you can literally hear their trajectory through the grad program.
Yep.
Because they were the snake sausage individual.
Yes.
Yeah. But and then we have Casey Cannon, who I think Casey is at St. Augustine Alligator Farm right now working with Temistoma. So like the fact that I get to do research at a crocodile farm with freaking Temistoma, like how could you possibly say no to that? So the people at West Lib are always like, Zach, why are you doing this to yourself? And I'm like, do you see what I get to do? Why would you say no to that? So, but that's another incident where the croc farm people know what they're doing. I don't know much about crocodiling. I can set up an experiment. So it's a team setting to get the grad students through. The only ones that doesn't work is with the students that are like Mac, who's doing the boldness with the false water cobras. That's just here. So that's a different story. Anyway, so that's that.
Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is really just the process of this, which I know you've ranted and raved over for the past like year or two, just creating this. And I mean, this is no joke, guys. This is a thick book. I hope you're all watching and see. The first thing I messaged Zach after I received it was, holy shit, this thing is huge. And he was like, yep, I packed as much info as I could into it.
Yeah.
No,
that was a labor of love. I felt like I was in a position of where it was almost like my duty. I needed to get street cred, is what I'm trying to say. And in academia, you get street cred by writing. And I also knew the books that I wanted when I was 20, and I wasn't really getting those books. And then I got the complete Carpet Python, the first one. And that book was like, whoa, what is this? Like, this is literally what I want all the books to be like that I buy. And so I knew that those books were being written. But initially, that book was supposed to be part of the freaking hognose snake book. The hognose snake book was initially titled A Complete Guide to Hognose Snakes and Their Allies, because Bob Ashley, who's Eco Publishing, he wanted a hognose snake book, and I wanted to write that book, but I wanted to write about these other things, and we compromised and said you can do both, but hognose snakes have to be the focus. And when I got done with the Musarana chapter, which was the first chapter I wrote, and it's like 30 pages long, and I did some math that even I could do at this desk, and I was like, this book's going to be like 900 pages. So I went to Bob and was like, Bob, is there any way that I can do like the starter book on the falsies? And he said, well, I really don't want to do that book, but talk to Russ. And so I talked to Russ, and Russ Gurley, who's one of my favorite humans on planet Earth, I sent him, I had the book 75% written, at that time.
Yeah.
Sent it to him, and he was like, "I'm doing this. We're doing this." And then the rest is
Nice.
history. But I can honestly say, academically, professionally, whatever you want to call it, writing that book was without question my favorite thing I have ever done.
Yeah.
It was like my worlds just kind of did this and coalesced perfectly, because teaching is my number one passion. I tell everybody that I'm an okay scientist, a great naturalist, and a fantastic teacher. That's what I want to be remembered as.
Yeah.
And so this was, this was that. But at the same time, I got to nerd out with natural history, which is my other number one love. And I just basically enjoyed it to death. Now, the editing part of it was brutal, which I've talked about ad length. In fact, I think I shot myself in the foot by making it sound like the book was a piece of crap and Mark O'Shea just fixed it. And it wasn't a piece of crap. It was just when you hand it off to a guy who does nothing but snakes all the time and literally has a spreadsheet of every living snake and all the taxonomic changes and things.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And you hand it to that guy, he's going to find mistakes because I didn't have that knowledge. And so cleaning it up and getting it to the final draft, that was even enjoyable. There were a couple days where I was like, okay, is this done? Like, could this please be done? But that lasted an hour. I'd go to bed, I'd wake up the next day, and I would hit it again. So I'm proud of it. I know that the hognose snake book will be better because that's my first rodeo. And my wife and I were talking about this today, because she says, like, you almost use that book as your post-COVID therapy. Because if we all remember, 21 and 22 were rough years for everybody. Yeah. And she's right. Like when I needed to escape all the BS that was happening around me, I got to write a book. You know what I mean? So I'm just really looking forward to putting everything into the hognose snake book. So like I said, I got to get these papers written because if I don't, I'm in trouble. But once those papers are written, I'm going to go back to my happy place, which is going to be writing the book. So
and man, I mean, like I was telling you, I was flipping through it today, and I have to compliment, like, even just like, it wasn't basic writing either. Like, you were writing like very well thought out, like just the writing in general. Because I will say I used to read like a mofo when I was a younger kid, but like, it's just a very well written book, plus all the information jam packed, plus the pictures. I mean, and all that science is crazy. So you have to be proud of that. I mean, it's just awesome. So
I'm proud of it. I like anybody. I try to be a humble person.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to doing the second edition where I can clean up a couple bits and pieces.
Okay.
That, like, if you read it, there's a section in the Barron's Racer section where you can tell that my brain just went. And Chris Sharp, who we had on our podcast, he was reading it, and he actually took a picture of it. And he was like, "What do you mean by this?" And I was like, "Yeah, just pretend that doesn't exist." So there's like 2 or 3 of those in there, which is fine in a 300-page book. And I want to clean that. But no, I am proud of it. The thing that I like about it is I kind of, that first chapter is the one that I'm probably the most proud of, because I hear people all the time, like the whole North American rat snakes, and we sunk all the subspecies, and this is garbage. That whole argument, like, I wanted to at least present. I'm not saying I agree with the sinking, by the way, but I feel like you're more informed if you learn why they were sunk, instead of just saying they're sunk, it's garbage. You know what I mean? So the first part of the book is my little attempt at giving everybody in herpetoculture a little lesson in phylogenetics and, why we do what we do as scientists, because I do that stuff as a crayfish biologist when I have to describe a species. So I know why the decisions are being made, but just having opportunities to kind of take the world of herpetology, herpetoculture, and kind of smush them together. That's what I've decided I want to do with my career. And that's what that book enabled me to do. So
very cool. Awesome. All right. So kind of getting into the last couple wrap up questions here. I usually ask, like, what does the future hold for you, any species of the future. But I actually kind of want to change that because, in your position as the host of Colubrid and Colubroid, you and Clint, I feel, hold a lot of power over the Colubrid world. And something you guys have recently talked about attempting is Colubrid Fest, which is something that very much attracts me, and I'd love to go whenever the first time that is. Can you talk about that to this group of people if you can?
Yeah, I can talk about the ethos
to the small
of it.
extent. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of details that are whirling around, and I'm afraid that I'll say something that'll then not be true.
Okay.
But Clint and I are dangerous together. That's what, because he is my brother from another mother, but we have, like, I do all the science, natural history, naturalistic, locality, keeping, and then we got Clint over here, who's a business guy.
Yep.
Who understands the market, understands, like, he's got it. He doesn't have to mass produce. He doesn't puppy mill. I'm not saying that, but he has to produce animals.
Yes.
Yep. So he does more of the minimalistic keeping, but he still has naturalistic cages all over his shop. But he does it like to the absolute best of his ability with the best equipment ever, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, we both are the kind of people that like to jump off a cliff, and we don't have any idea how the hell we're going to land. We just know we are. Okay. And it could end in our death. Or we could stick the landing and walk away and be like, that was cool. Let's do the next one. You know what I mean? And so when I started talking about Colubrid Fest, I was imagining Carpet Fest with colubrids, which is we go somewhere, we have a barbecue.
Which is what I thought when you guys first said it. And then
Clint is like on his own, because he didn't quite, I don't think he knew about that. He was like, oh, well, it's going to be a show, and we're going to have panels, and we're going to have presentations, and it's going to be all colubrids all the time. And that's going to be Colubrid Fest. And it's funny because, for a second there, I was like, what? It's like, that's what we're doing? And then I talked to Clint, and I was like, Clint, like, I think I messaged him. I don't know if I talked to him or I messaged him. I was like, like, this is normally a barbecue. And he was like, not for us. I was like, done. That's all he had to do. So our version is going to be some kind of show. It's going to be somewhere. This is what I can say.
Somewhere.
And it's going to probably be, but may not, between Daytona and Tinley is when we think we want to put it. But we have some announcements that'll be on the next episode.
Very cool.
If Clint confirmed what he was after. But he was messaging me all last week, and it was just up leveling with each text. Awesome. So it should be cool. But our goal is, if we have the show, we want it to be colubrid centric. I can say what part of the reason why we wanted to do it in September, I will say that. I can talk about this, is that hatchlings are out by then for most species, even like black milks and Hondurans are normally hatching by then. It's after Daytona. Daytona is probably the biggest colubrid show in the country. And so, everybody go to Daytona, there'll be leftovers from Daytona, just ship them up to wherever.
Which, by the way, I better see you. I want to see you at Daytona this year.
Here's the problem with Daytona. There is 1 week I have to be at West Liberty. There's 1 week.
Oh, yes. You did say that.
Yeah. And I can't break away. But I'm trying to figure out a way to break away because I want to go to Daytona. Well, Daytona is like the #1 show in the country for Florida Kings too. So like I and I want to meet a lot of people,
Yeah.
So, but that's what I can say about Colubrid Fest. And I will say, if you're at this point and you want to learn more, go to the CCR Facebook page, like it, because I guarantee you by that point in time, we'll have stuff up there. So, but no,
hell yeah,
it's going to be, we just have to see if people are willing to travel. That is the only potential hurdle that we see. But we took that all into consideration with our place for it, where it should be and everything. So,
okay. Very cool. All right, awesome. So kind of circling back to the beginning, of course, still talking about colubrids now. Kind of our wrap up is I like to ask people, pretend you're talking to someone who's never experienced a colubrid before. They're like a python or a boa person. What's kind of your elevator pitch to that person who might be on the fence of getting into colubrids? Like, what's your kind of message to say to them?
So I kept pythons and boas for quite some time. And the pace of life of a colubrid is much faster, and it kind of it suits our culture's ADHD is what I would say. So like if you want a snake that you can see gains in, it's going to go from this little worm to like a 2-foot animal in a year or maybe more. You'll get that with a colubrid. You can get that with a python. I understand that, but it's not the same. And then as far as like the engagement interaction, colubrids is where it's at, man. I mean, pythons they evolve to primarily sit and wait for prey to come to them. You got a dry markin or a crebo or a falsie. It senses prey. It finds the prey. It barrel rolls the prey. It swallows it while it's living. And then it comes back to you and says more. Like that level of engagement with a keeper, that's what I want. And even my king snakes, they do that. And then if you give them an enclosure that has structure in it, that has basking, platforms and perches and all that kind of jazz, colubrids seem to use it a lot more, and a lot more of the enclosure than the boids do. And so it's just a very different keeping experience. The only downside to colubrids is I don't like the fact that when they hatch their worms, most of them, that's where false water cobras spoil you, because they come out and they're the same size as a freaking ball python.
Okay.
They're eating fuzzies, right? Large fuzzies as their first meal. So
gotcha.
I get, so even you have that. If you don't want the worm, you have bigger colubrids that you can keep. And then my final thing I would say is the more you give colubrids, the more they pay you back with being an awesome captive. Like they just, that's why I keep a lot of my kings naturalistically, and I try to imitate the forest floor as I see it in Florida. And like I get to see the same behaviors I saw them doing when I was in Belle Glade. Like I have one that I put a bunch of oat grass in it, and the grass grew up, it died, and then it fell down. And she coils up underneath the grass the exact way I saw, a Florida king down there coiled up basking, doing the cryptic basking thing. Like for me as a nature nerd, it doesn't get better than that. So nice. I don't know if that's the best answer, but that's my answer.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Mm-hmm. Well, man, it's been a fantastic just over 2 hours. There's 24 likes on the podcast. I appreciate you all. If you haven't hit the like, hit it now. There's probably been about 25 to 30 people here throughout the night. What do you have to say to everyone who came out to see what you had to say?
Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more from me, go to those Instagram pages, Dr. Crawdad, or Facebook, Zac Loughman. And then I have to do it. I have to plug Colubrid Colubroid Radio.
Oh, of course. Dude, I talk about it every episode. Come on.
I know. So if you, I told Joe, we need more Colubrid podcasts and content. So, Joe's doing an amazing job, and I'm just happy to have you on here. And if you like this one, hit ours up too. But we're covering colubrids, and we've got great company. So excellent job, Joe.
Hell yeah. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Well, Zac, thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to throw you backstage. I'll run the outro, and we'll talk for a minute after. Just hang out.
All right. Later.
All right. Thanks. Guys, what another great episode of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. Great to have Zac on. I was really looking forward to that. Very cool episode. And, once again, Colubrid Podcast colliding. You know, it's cool. I'm sure it's nice for him to be on the other side of the table for once, because he does. Well, he did a lot of talking tonight, but he does quite a lot of talking on his own show. So, but I'm sure he enjoyed answering some questions this time. Guys, as usual, once again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button on today's video. As always, Meteoric Serpents t-shirts available. If you are interested, just hit me up in the Instagram DMs. Speaking of that, at Meteoric Serpents, go follow me there. Morph Market got some animals available if you want to check that out. If you want to diversify your diet, Blake's Exotic Feeders, hit him up on Instagram. Let him know Joe from Meteoric Serpents sent you. And last but not least, Meteoric Serpents Patreon. If you want to support me, if you want some more behind the scenes, if you want to help support what I'm doing with this podcast and help make that better, feel free to join that. It's the first link in the description. Otherwise, guys, go follow Zac. His Instagram is in the description. But I hope you all had a great night tonight. Once again, this was episode number 18 of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast with Dr. Zac Loughman. Peace out, guys. See you all next week.